And I've gotten this from Wisconsin farmers and Wisconsin ethanol producers as well. Hey, I'm as conservative. You got to remember, a lot of conservative farmers out there, Jay. You're insulting all of us when you call this crap gas and when you call for the end of ethanol subsidies. Got to remember, a lot of us conservative farmers out there are listening to you. Well, if you're a conservative, you're a conservative. And not just until it doesn't benefit you anymore. So these so-called conservative farmers that showed up at this Corn Growers Association meeting shouldn't be seeing this as a deal breaker. Oh, yeah, I'm in favor of you cutting off all those other government subsidies, but you got to keep ours going. That's not a conservative position. And the lobbyist says he didn't come out and say he'd repeal the mandate. No, he didn't. But he should, because it would be a winner of a position. Maybe not in Iowa, but around the rest of the country. And it would be a great contrast to Mitt Romney, who claims he's against government tampering in the economy, but then expresses an unabashed support for ethanol subsidies. Mitt Romney has expressed total support for both the per-gallon subsidy and the mandate that we're talking about here. Back in May, you may remember, Tim Pawlenty had the guts in Iowa to say ethanol subsidies should be phased out. Romney saw the opportunity and he rushed to embrace them. Quote, I support the subsidy of ethanol, he told an Iowa voter. I believe ethanol is an important part of our energy solution in this country. By the way, how deflating does it have to be to me, Mitt Romney, right now? He's been campaigning for the 2012 nomination literally since the last presidential campaign ended in November of 2008. He thought he was the front runner. He had to figure he was sitting pretty by leading the rest of the field past the Iowa straw poll. I know that Michelle Bachmann won the Iowa straw poll, but he wasn't as invested in Iowa as he is elsewhere. He had to feel pretty good about his chances to get this nomination, and then Rick Perry jumps in. And Mitt, who has been campaigning really nonstop for 6 years, becomes a distant second. Toby Harnden did a piece on this weekend. He said, Mitt Romney's been running for president for nigh on 6 years. He finished third last time around, but he continued on, hardly missing a beat. The new 2012 Romney is making an effort to appear more ordinary. He's almost never seen in a suit or tie, instead wearing chinos and Oxford shirts. His famously perfect hair is now slightly mussed up. Gone is the presidential-style entourage of 2008. He now travels with a single Chevy Suburban. Despite everything, however, his longevity as a candidate, his willingness to do what it takes, and endure the loneliness and humiliating scrutiny, some of his supporters now fear that it will be all for naught. Having been anointed frontrunner for months, the former Massachusetts governor is now under serious threat from Governor Rick Perry of Texas, who opened up a Gallup poll lead of 12 points after just a week in the race. Romney's response so far has been to ignore this new pretender. The permanent campaigner for the Republican presidential nomination clearly hates campaigning. Standing in school gymnasiums and civic buildings in New Hampshire last week, Romney seemed almost pained by the indignity of having to respond to questions. Sometimes he answered patiently, as if addressing a school child. On other occasions, he was brusque, almost sarcastic. In Lebanon, New Hampshire, he virtually shouted down a woman asking about Social Security reform. "You had your turn, madam. Let me have mine," he said fiercely. "Listen, I'm sorry, it's my turn." I've seen the video on this. This woman asked a rambling question that would never end, and just didn't stop and didn't stop and didn't stop. He was right to hop on her. Harnden says this exchange was viewed by most as an error, as an example of a candidate lowering himself and losing his cool. In fact, the newly engaged and animated Romney, for him, it was an improvement, he says. I agree with this. He was showing that he can be hard-edged and combative at a time when most Americans are demanding action rather than emollient words. Since Perry's surge, the press and many Republicans have demanded that Romney take on his new arrival, who has pushed Michelle Bachmann into a distant third place. Romney must be sorely tempted, but his advisors believe that Rick Perry is too extreme, too Southern, and too Texan to be electable. And there it is again, that East Coast arrogance that anyone outside of that Maine to Virginia corridor is just unfit to be president. And unless you come from California, of course. It happens every election. And yet, you know what? I look back. Every election, someone other than the D.C. insiders elected president. Every president since JFK has been from flyover country.